I'm just gonna pop this on the cool setting on low. Give it a test first. Hey everyone, thanks for joining me. We're making a marbled glaze cake. Now, I absolutely love this technique. It is so much fun. I'm using flavors of black sesame for mine, my personal favorite. But if you don't like black sesame, totally fine. You can substitute cocoa powder for the black sesame in this recipe and make a divine chocolate cake. The recipe is in Bake My Day cookbook, but I also have it written for you in the description of this video. So let's make some cake. So to make the layers of our black sesame sponge cake for our marble glaze cake, we have brown sugar, softened butter, vanilla bean paste, some black sesame paste. Now, if you don't like black sesame, just substitute for cocoa powder and you can have a chocolate sponge cake instead of a black sesame sponge cake. We've got some whisked eggs and some self-raising flour. Okay, so we've got our soft brown sugar in here, and then I'll add my softened butter. I'm using softened butter just because it's so much easier to cream the ingredients together. Cold butter just won't mix through. Now to soften your butter, just pop cold butter in the microwave for about 30 seconds. That's a really fast way of doing it. My butter is in there, and now I've got my vanilla bean paste. You can use vanilla extract, you can use fresh vanilla beans too. I'm using vanilla bean paste because it's convenient, it's easy, great flavor. And I've got my black sesame paste. This is available in most health food stores. You can buy it online. I love black sesame because being Vietnamese, I've grown up with this flavor in Asian desserts. Absolutely love it. It's kind of like peanut butter. It gives you that really smoky, nutty flavor. It's delicious and a really kind of like peanut buttery mouthfeel as well, which is like so yummy. If you don't like black sesame, totally fine, I get it. Just use cocoa powder instead. They're kind of similar. Black sesame is more like toasted and like that nutty flavor. Cocoa powder gives a more chocolatey flavor, but they substitute together really beautifully. Okay, so now I've got all of these ingredients together that I'm going to cream. Let's cream. Now, once that looks pretty creamy, you'll know it's creamed because it's gone a lot more pale in color. I'm just gonna scrape the sides of the bowl because sometimes the whisks of the mixer don't scrape the bowl properly. So just use a spatula and do this. And cream again. Okay, so that's done. This is the consistency, oops, a little bit of buttercream on the table. This is the consistency you want, nice and pale, thick and creamy. Now I'll slowly add my whisked eggs. Now I've just given these a whisk by hand so that they mix through easier. If you can't be bothered, it's fine. I don't think it makes that much of a difference, to be honest. Just a little bit at a time. A little bit more. So now that the eggs are combined, everything is creamed together, I'll add my flour. Now I don't sift my self-raising flour because I'm lazy. I really don't think you need to. So let's just see how we go. I add it in 1/3 increments and then I mix through. You're supposed to fold the flour through for a sponge cake. If you have your mixer on low, it really shouldn't push out too many of the air pockets. The other third, first. Okay, that's just mixed through, and now the rest of my flour. Now at this point, it's almost mixed through. The secret ingredient for any fluffy sponge cake to really give it that lift is to add some hot water. Now the hot water will react with the baking powder in the self-raising flour and make the whole cake really nice, fluffy and spongy. So let's add some hot water. I've popped my kettle on and I'm going to add about 2 tablespoons of hot water. The water is hot, so I'm just gonna mix that through gently by hand first, and then I'll turn the mixer on. I just don't want any hot water to spray up into my face. And I'll give that a little scrape, just to make sure there are no lumps of flour hiding at the bottom. That is our black sesame sponge cake batter done. It should look like this, nice and incorporated, not too overworked, not too thick, not too thin. If it is a bit thick, you can add some more hot water. Oops. And it tastes really good. So now we're ready to bake our cakes. I've got my oven preheated at 160 degrees fan force, and I'm going to divide this sponge cake batter into 3 cake tins. Give them a little bit of a spray with some cooking oil spray. Don't breathe it in. You don't want oil in your lungs. Okay. For extra safety, I'll line them with some baking paper. Now you don't need to use baking paper. I'm just doing this in case they do stick to the bottom of the pans. Very basic cutting. I don't need it to be perfect. I just need it to line most of the bottom of the cake tin. So I'm cutting a circle, roughly the same diameter as my cake tins. My cake tins, they look like they're about 7 inches. Again, you can make your cake wider, you can make your cake higher. I like to use 7-inch cake tins. Does that fit? Yes, it does. So I've ended up with 4. Pop one in here. Done. That's our crafternoon session done. So now I just divide the batter into the cake tins. You can use a scale to measure this, but I just go by eye. Or spread out the batter. Now you don't need to level out the batter too much because it will spread out once it's baking in the oven. Now I'll pop these into a preheated oven at 160 degrees Celsius for 20 minutes. While the sponge cake layers are baking in the oven, let's make my favorite mirror glaze. So the ingredients are some pre-soaked gelatin, condensed milk, water, caster sugar, glucose syrup, and some white chocolate. First step, we've got our caster sugar in a saucepan. So we'll add that to a saucepan with some water and some glucose syrup. Now the glucose syrup helps to give the mirror glaze that awesome shine. It is pretty tricky to work with, as you can see, super sticky. This is the gloss, and we will heat that together on about low to medium heat. I want to heat the caster sugar so that it melts through and there are no more grainy, gritty bits of sugar left. Now I'll mix through my condensed milk, and I've got my gelatin that's been soaking. I'll wring the water out of that, and then I'll add the gelatin to the mix. So now all of my ingredients are combined. Take this off heat completely, and I'll add it to my white chocolate. And let that sit for a little bit so the chocolate can melt, and then we'll mix it. So my chosen colors for this glaze will be black and white. So I'll just divide the glaze evenly. I'll color one black and one white. I've chosen these colors because I love the contrast. I think they work really well together, but you can use any colors that you like. I just love black and white. Divide that. So I'm gonna color this one black, and I've just got some black food coloring paste. I'm using Creative Cake Decorating brand. It's actually made with vegetable carbon, so it's not nasty for you at all, and it doesn't stain your teeth, which is really important to me. You can get black food coloring, white food coloring, Creative Cake Decorating branded food coloring at most cake decorating stores. You can also buy online. Okay, this is mixed through really well. This is nice and black. It's gonna contrast so well against the white. Set this aside and let's color our white. I've got some white chocolate oil here. that is a really nice opaque white color that's going to be perfect to cover my cake. Now I'll pop my glaze aside and let's take the cakes out of the oven. Okay, our sponges look really nice and caramelized. Let's pop one out. Oh, perfect! 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 So my black sesame sponge cake layers, they're cooling down. They are so bouncy and tender and delicious, and I cannot wait to eat these. I'll set them aside to cool even further while I make the buttercream. So I've made a very basic buttercream. It's so delicious. Softened butter, icing sugar, vanilla bean paste. And I'll add some black sesame paste to this for extra flavor and those caramel notes. Again, if you don't like black sesame, just use cocoa powder instead. I've got the recipe for this basic buttercream in the description of this video. The consistency should look nice and fluffy and the black sesame thoroughly mixed through. So now I'm going to assemble our cake so I can pop it in the freezer. We've got an offset metal spatula, a small cake scraper, a cake board, and a cake turntable. All right, first layer of cake. It's just so moist and sticky that it's not coming off the baking paper. That's a good sign. Pop that on the cake board. You don't need to stick it on the cake board with buttercream because once we glaze the cake, we'll need to lift this off the cake board anyway. So don't worry about sticking the cake on. A dollop of buttercream. Oh.
Yum!
My next layer of cake. That on. You can see just how tender these cake layers are. They're so good. Put some buttercream on the edges there. If you see your buttercream squeezing out the layers, just use your spatula and push it back in. Now I'm going to do a very thin layer of buttercream on top because I can see that this cake, because it's so tender and delicious, it's a little bit fragile. So I might pop it in the fridge first for about 5 minutes, let the buttercream set, and then do the next layer. So I'll just do a very thin layer of buttercream so that it doesn't dry out in the fridge. Just cover that up like so. So I'm just adding a very thin crumb coat. I'll pop this in the fridge, and then once it's set, I'll add my final layer. This will only take about 5-10 minutes to set. I just don't want the cake to collapse, so pop it in the fridge for a little bit. It's better too much than not enough because you can always scrape it off. Oops. Bit of a buttercream splatter. Always happens. I'm just using my offset spatula just to add a little bit more buttercream on top. If at any point you feel like your cake is moving around too much or the buttercream just feels a little bit too sloppy, pop the cake in the fridge for about 5-10 minutes. It will be completely fine to be popped in the fridge and outside of the fridge. Keep doing that. Do whatever you need to do so that the frosting or the buttercream is workable and your cake is nice and firm. Doesn't need to be too perfect at this stage because we have our cake scraper to help us with that. So I'll show you how I smooth this with the cake scraper. Make sure you've got enough buttercream on the outside of your cake. Grab your cake scraper, use the sharp beveled edge. It's a bit hard to see, but just use the sharpest edge of your cake scraper. I hold it at about 90 degrees, slightly towards myself, and just slowly smooth the buttercream. Once you see that you've got quite a lot of buttercream on your scraper, just pop it back in the bowl and keep scraping. Now I'm happy with the bottom. The top just needs a little bit more buttercream around the edge. Pop some buttercream, just this top edge to build it up a little bit. Again, it's best to have too much rather than not enough because you'll scrape it off. I might just pop this in the fridge for about 5 minutes, let that set, and then add a little bit more buttercream. Okay, I am done putting buttercream on my cake. That is looking nice and smooth, delicious. And now I'm going to pop this in the freezer for about an hour. So I've got the cake sitting in the freezer, it's set nice and firm, and I'm just checking on my glaze. We want our glaze to be between 35 to 38 degrees for pouring. I have a trusty thermometer for that, but you can usually see, so that's about 37 degrees now. You can usually see when it's ready. You want it to coat the spoon or the spatula, but see how that's quite runny? I think that's a little bit too runny. But you also want it to be thick, but not too thick. Whereas this one is looking, this is a little bit thicker. Let's see what that temperature is. That's about 35 degrees. See how it's coating the outside of the bowl? It's completely coated this spatula. So just imagine that on a frozen cake. It will set really quickly, and that's what we want. This glaze is still a little bit runny, but you know what? Don't stress too much about getting the temperatures exactly right. Once you mix them together on the cake, they do balance themselves out. If one glaze cools down a little bit too fast, that's totally fine. If it's too thick for you to use, just pop it in the microwave, warm it up for about 5 to 10 seconds, give it a mix, and that should be enough to melt it back to temperature again. So don't stress too much about getting it exactly right. You can always reheat it. Glaze here, frozen cake here. I'm just gonna put a spatula underneath the cake. I need to pry my cake off, run it across. Do we have liftoff? We've got liftoff. And then you bring your cake over. Come on, spatula. Yep, that cake isn't going anywhere. You might wanna just clean up the edges a little bit. What you will need for this next step is your glaze and a hairdryer. I'm just gonna pop this on the cool setting on low. Give it a test first. And you just need enough air to move the glaze around your cake. Here we go. Let's do the first layer. And we'll do some of the white layer. Some of the white on that. How are we looking? That looks awesome. So we want to make sure the cake is completely covered. Have a look. Oh, nice. Cake is completely covered. Oh, do we want a bit more white? We've still got some white glaze here. Okay, now let's do the marble effect with our hairdryer. So we let this drip for, say, about 5 minutes. Now we're ready to transfer our cake from the tray to our cake stand. You might have some little bits of glaze that have set. That's okay, just get a sharp knife and you just kind of trim them off. Very easy. There we are. Now with any leftover glaze, you can let the glaze set on the tray and then peel it off and reuse it. That's totally fine. So feel free to reuse your glaze. Once you mix these colors up, it will become like a gray color. Okay, moment of truth. We are going to transfer the cake from here to here. Let's see how I go. 2 offset metal spatulas, steady hands, and a can-do attitude. Famous last words. Might need someone's help here. Thanks, Jordan. And now we lift. Done! Woohoo! We did it! Ludo! So here we have our marbled glazed cake. I'm really happy with the edges on this cake, but if you're not, if you find them a little bit messy, totally fine. Add some sprinkles to the outside. You can add some crushed up Oreo biscuits, anything really, some nerds. On top, you can add chocolate, some edible flowers. I'm going to leave mine as is because I just think it looks so striking on its own, and I'm really happy with the glaze. You can use mirror glaze for any kind of cake, for any occasion. Black and white I think is really sophisticated, but you can also use it for Halloween. Mix up the colors for birthday cakes, wedding cakes, engagement parties, anything you'd like. I'm really excited to see what you all create, and thank you so much for joining me. I've had a blast.